Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Flagship Studio at the JP Morgan Health Conference to discuss today AI in action. I have with me a panel from our companies and from Flagship. I will start maybe with Molly. Molly is an origination partner at Flagship. Worked on many companies at the intersection of AI and biology. We have Rajesh Ramaswamy. Rajesh is Senior Vice President at Sail Biomedicines, focusing on AI and machine learning. And I have next to me Mickey Atwal, joined us just recently, a couple of weeks, and he's our Chief Data and AI Officer at Pioneering Intelligence. I'm Marcello Damiani. I'm a senior partner at Flagship, focusing on AI, digital, and operation strategies at Flagship, and co-leading Pioneering Intelligence initiative. As you all know, Flagship work on creating breakthrough company in human health. And in the recent year, we've seen more and more AI being introduced to those companies, and innovation in AI leading to breakthrough in drug discovery and drug design and clinical development and so on, and AI providing or driving more value year over year. So maybe I will start with Molly, just to discuss why this is happening, and maybe Molly, you can introduce yourself as well and your work. Why this is happening. You've been originating companies at the intersection of AI, biology. Those companies has been using more and more AI at the core, and you've been growing those companies, and now some of them are very mature. So maybe you can help us understand from your perspective how AI achieved that.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll tell a little bit about how I think about AI and integrating into science and how we've been using it. So a lot of the reason that science is very complex. There are many things that machines are actually much better at than the human brain is altogether. When we started Generate Biomedicines in 2018, a lot of what we were thinking about is that there is a relationship between a DNA sequence and a protein structure and function. That relationship exists, but it's this really complex statistical properties that the human brain is not at all evolved to understand, but machines and machine learning are perfectly suited to do so. And so that's really where I started on this journey of really understanding where can we actually create these like very narrow but important intelligences that are really super intelligences that are higher intelligent than any human brain, for example, at predicting the specific function of a protein. So if you can predict it and generate a novel protein function for any therapeutic purpose with precision, then you completely change the paradigm by which science is done and which proteins are created. Now you can take that even further, and this is what we're seeing today, where at that moment we were thinking, okay, how can machines do something that a human brain is not evolved to do, which is generate a protein therapeutic. But now we're asking questions about what if a machine could actually be better than a human at things that a human is evolved to do, like reason about science. And so starting to integrate AI not only into specific components of the process of drug discovery and development, but actually integrating it end to end. And I think you're seeing this evolution of AI having shown repeatedly across domains in science that it can really create things faster, more efficient, and better, importantly, in these very specific domains. But now we're also seeing that it's going to be able to do that across the entire spectrum of science, and that's really what we're thinking about really at Lila Sciences today.
Okay, thank you, Molly. Rajesh, maybe I'll switch to you. And at Sail Biomedicines, you are using AI in multiple settings, really, to improve on the science that you're working at, on iteration to collect data, use that data to continuously improve what you're doing, and it's an iterative cycle that you go through. So maybe you can help us understand how this is working, how it's helping Sail Biomedicine achieve its goal in developing the company.
Yeah. So at Sail, we look at medicine as code, right? That is engineerable, like computer code, right? Whereas computer code programs underlying hardware for tasks such as a complex calculation, the medicines that we are pioneering are meant to reprogram cells to help the body fight disease. So like a well-crafted code, Sail's RNA medicines are beautifully modular with components, each of which have well-defined function. And what we are doing, fueled by large-scale data generation, we are teaching machines to iteratively master writing the code for each module of the medicine so that the entire medicine has performance to unlock a variety of therapeutic benefits. So by closely coupling, to your point of iteration, closely coupling large-scale data generation and iterating between large-scale data generation and deep learning, we are mastering essentially the language of life to enable generative and integrative design of the entire medicine for required performance. And to your point, this is not a vision or a dream. This is already happening at Sail today, where AI is driving improvements in the RNA medicine construct that we have. It is fueling pretty cool program and product opportunities that we are pursuing as we speak.
Yeah. And it seems that you're implementing this at every step in your process, as Molly mentioned. And overall, are you looking overall as well how AI is going to collect all that information and make it coherent as a whole to the company, or how you're looking at it?
Yeah. So we are, like I said, we are looking at the entirety of the medicine. The medicine has a lot of different components, modular. So we are collecting data on each and every component. So the way we are looking at it is, from a classical engineering perspective. A medicine is made up of lots of different variables that has an impact on performance. So we are, by changing a lot of different variables, we are collecting data on how it affects the performance of the medicine using in vitro assays, in-cell assays, in vivo experiments. And that entirety of data set we are using to engineer everything. So that's in the preclinical space, right? And as the company kind of grows and we get into, let's say, the clinical stages and kind of, a more mature company, I think AI is going to have a role to play in every part of the value chain, in every part of kind of the value chain to bring medicines to patients in need.
And Molly, I mean, in your experience as well, do you work on each of the component and then the overall, or you tackle first holistically and then maybe deep dive in the components? How did you approach it?
Yeah, maybe I'll give a specific example when we're thinking about Generate. So one of the benefits in my mind of AI is that it's able to do, again, things that the human mind can't do, or that experiments themselves can't do. So example being that with every protein therapeutic, there are many different properties that need to come into play in order to create a medicine for patients. Not just the binding of the protein, but the function of the protein, the developability of the protein, and the list is quite long. And so being able to actually integrate all of those optimization functions into a single step and optimize all the properties at once was a really big advantage in our mind of being able to use AI. And so the next step then is how do you actually then go into the lab and test it? And so when we think about that full wheel of science, this is where we're starting to think about where can AI start to make differences, not just in the holistic of the medicine, like Rajesh is mentioning around making sure that end to end the medicine is designed with AI in mind, but how does that full loop start to become really driven by AI?
You're new, but as you know, Pioneering Intelligence is driving innovation in science using cutting-edge AI. And we have high ambitions really to improve our AI and to make leaps in human health using AI in Pioneering Intelligence. Can you tell us a bit about Pioneering Intelligence and what's your vision for the next year or the next few years?
Yeah, thank you. So we really want to see Pioneering Intelligence grow as a center of expertise in AI and ML. If you look at the healthcare industry, there are many applications in which we do generate data at scale of sufficient quality, where it is natural to think about, ML and AI approaches to help accelerate that process. I think it's kind of interesting to look at where we are now and how we're going to project ourselves forward. Only last month, we saw the Nobel Prize in Chemistry being awarded for the protein folding problem, understanding computationally, can you predict a three-dimensional structure from the sequence? And what we're excited about is extending this capability to modalities beyond proteins, so RNA molecules, DNA molecules, modified residues, glycans, covalent ligands, for example. And I think the next wave of impact in this space is understanding the interactions between these different classes of molecules. But that's going to be transformative for understanding how drugs can actually impact their targets in a very predictive manner. So those are the things that we're looking forward to in the next 12 months. And rather than looking at things at the molecular scale, one of the things that we're looking at, and this is a hypothesis, is does it make sense to go even further and look at things at the atomic resolution? One could argue if you are able to model molecules at a much more coarse-grained resolution, at a much more fine-grained resolution at an atomistic level, maybe you'll do a better job in understanding the binding between these different biomolecules.
Okay, thank you. So in the last 2 years, we hear about large language models, and those large language models are everywhere today. So those are coming, or they are in our world as well, and they are playing an outsized role today. How do you see those large language models compared to traditional AI, I would say, in machine learning in our field? Do you see large language model really taking over, or do you see still a role for other type of AI in our industry?
Yeah.
Anyone?
I think large language models are here to stay because they're great at solving a particular class of problems when you have sequential data of sufficient scale. So they were developed initially for natural language processing. In fact, one of the early applications was translation from one language to another language. The great thing about biology and modern day biology, many of the data sets we deal with are essentially sequential data. So if you think about proteins, they are one-dimensional sequences of amino acids. Analogously, the DNA and RNA, they're one-dimensional sequences. And so since we generate an enormous amount of this amount of data, of these different biomolecular data sets, large language models are great at understanding the patterns of these different molecules and understanding the interactions between these different aspects of these molecules. But the whole industry of machine learning, statistics, and AI is fairly mature. It's been around for decades, and a big part of that has been tasked with understanding large data sets, unsupervised learning, supervised learning, and that's really played an outsized role in target discovery. And I think that's still going to be there. And there are many data sets which don't lend themselves to these one-dimensional sequential text-like data sets. But what we're really excited about is another layer of abstraction beyond large language models. And these are these agentic AI systems, whereby you can start thinking about, can I develop an AI system that can automate and start reasoning through complex tasks? Right? I'll give you an example. The design of clinical trials is really quite complicated. It's burdensome. There's a lot of administrative tasks. You can think about developing agentic AIs on top of large language models, which can reason through the problems of understanding how do you enroll patients, screen them, how do you think about doing the analytics in real time, and hopefully this will reduce the delays, reduce the costs, and hopefully get the drugs to patients in a shorter time span.
Yeah. And if I can add,
Yeah, please go.
LLMs are just amazing. I mean, what it's able to do, it's just simply phenomenal, right? And to add to what Miki said, 2023 was when it mastered human language and let's say human-made language like computer code. 2024, it's gone into, let's say, the multimodal regime, where now it can also integrate, data such as, not only linear text, but audio, images, and video as well to give us a much more nuanced and comprehensive understanding of the world that we see, hear, and feel. Right? At Sail, we are focused, our mission is focused on mastering the language of life to enable generative and integrative engineering of the entire medicine for performance. So just by nature of it, like the multimodal LLMs have a big role to play. There is just no question about that. But so do other models as well, such as diffusion models and like graph neural networks, depending on the problem that you want to solve, right? And that's where I think one of the stuff I would like to add, I think the problem always needs to kind of come first, and all the AI applications are a means to kind of like solve a problem. In our case, the problem is how do we kind of, engineer medicines that have phenomenal performance to be able to, address variety of diseases.
Molly?
Yeah, I think the thing that we're seeing, and then you're hearing it in the conversation here, is that what's really gonna emerge is this ecosystem of models. We're gonna have centralized models that are able to do planning and able to use different types of tools. Some of those being diffusion models, some of those being just old school Bayesian optimization or whatever you need, whatever statistical model you need for a particular purpose. And even extensions on top of existing LLMs to add additional reasoning capabilities to do these types of systems. And so as LLMs are increasing in intelligence themselves, the surrounding ecosystem of being able to call more and more sophisticated molecular models, atomistic models, actually even the lab itself as a tool, is where this is going, and this future of an ecosystem of AIs is really what I'm most excited about as well.
And I think Rajesh mentioned data.
Yeah.
So how you guys are thinking about the data, and is it procuring data, generating data, is it using existing data on the web? How do you think about data in life science? Because it's very different data in life science than data for text or even videos and imaging. And maybe a secondary question is algorithmic versus data. Do you need small sets of data but better algorithmic, or do you need larger sets of data and maybe use existing algorithms? So.
I think this is really important to emphasize the role of data, and perhaps not as much focus has been placed on data in these discussions around AI. Right? It's really the fuel by which the performance of these AI models work very, very well. And I would say even before you think about the data, you really have to spend most of your time discussing what is the scientific question you care about, right? What is the hypothesis you want to investigate? Once you've spent all your time arguing and you get a bunch of smart people in a room and you thrash things out, it should then be fairly obvious what data sets you should be collecting, right? Because if you have biased data sets or data sets that are too heterogeneous, that's not going to solve the issue at hand. And once you've gone through that process of understanding what data sets you need to accrue, whether it's from public repositories or you have to develop technologies to get that biometric data in-house, then it should be fairly obvious what machine learning or AI approach you should be using, right? Not the other way around, which I sometimes see too often in the field. People get enamored with an AI approach, and they've got this giant hammer, they're looking for a nail. They're looking for the data, And then they ask, what's the scientific question we can address with this AI algorithm? So we are very much a science-first organization here. And so, yeah, data is crucial, but before you hit the data, you have to ask them what kind of data you want to collect at scale.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting conversation around, oftentimes I've heard this being posed of like data or algorithms, data versus algorithms. We've seen this even in recent news around kind of the importance of data over algorithms. I think one of the most important things to keep in mind is it's like an and statement. All of these things are essential. Our ability to create better data sets, and there's lots of forms of better data sets, whether that's iterative data sets, being able to iterate quickly, whether that's large-scale data sets, whether that's like incredibly high content data sets, like what Denali is doing with cryo-EM, for example. It's also better algorithms. Being able to, there's a ton of lift on the same data set. I mean, this is really AlphaFold in a nutshell. The PDB was a remarkable set of data that had been, collected over decades. But the innovations that DeepMind did and algorithmically on the same data set was essential to get the outcomes that they had. So the data plus the algorithms plus scale and being able to scale all these algorithms at on large data sets, it's all of these together that's really going to be the magic sauce. And I don't think you can really kind of have it be a one or the other situation. I think it has to be an all situation, and figuring out when and where to innovate in all of these different places is really how we spend our time thinking about.
Yeah. I think I agree with that. I think both are important. And I think there's a very simple argument from my perspective, right? Data is the way through which we query how the world works, right? Whether it be the world that we see or the world that we don't see through measurements, right? Algorithms are the means through which you are using data to teach machines to understand how the world works so that you can extrapolate into the unknown. So based on this perspective, I don't think there is any debate of like data versus algorithms. Both are extremely important. And at Sail, we spend a lot of time doing both, really generating data sets at scale so that we can iteratively improve the performance. But also, we need to develop algorithms to kind of like squeeze the juice and like extract all the patterns that are in the data sets as well. So I think both are extremely crucial from my perspective. Data generation, acquisition for the problems that you are trying to solve, and algorithms to be able to teach machines to learn all the nuances that are hidden inside the data sets.
Yeah, and we are in San Francisco in the tech world, so algorithmic is key. Yesterday, Nubar in his annual letter talked about polyintelligence, how the human intelligence plus the machine intelligence plus nature intelligence are really leading us to make leaps in improving human health. Can you comment on how do you think this polyintelligence is helping in the creation of companies that we have at Flagship, and how those companies are going to make leaps in human health? Maybe.
It's a great letter, right? And anybody seeing this should go out and actually read the letter. I think it's available online right now. The whole field of artificial intelligence, if you go back to the early days, was really inspired by our attempts to understand the nervous system, right? Our biological intelligence. And it's in the name, right? Neural networks. Convolutional neural networks were developed by Yann LeCun in the 80s and 90s at his attempts to understand the visual cortex in a cat, right? And it's been enormously, transformative in our ability to analyze and interpret images. And I think, there's going to be a need for additional innovations whereby we get inspiration from biological intelligence that are going to be, useful, that we can, automate and, put it in silico and help solve complex tasks, right? There are a whole variety, a whole zoo of problems, complex tasks that biological organisms can solve very, very quickly, things we take for granted that we just don't know how to implement. So I think, large language models are great, but I think to get to artificial superintelligence, beyond human intelligence, you're going to need several layers of innovation beyond what we have now.
I mean, I think one of the things that is true in what you said is the ability to learn from nature at scale, both from machines and humans, is such a marvelous thing. Like, nature is really remarkable. From, we learned in the protein field from directed evolution itself, actually allowing machines to understand and learn the process of directed evolution guided by human intention. The ability to understand and study the human brain and emulate that in algorithms is another way in which nature has given us inspiration. And we've used machines to understand that, and then added to it by adding what humans do really well about reasoning and giving purpose to the goal of what we're trying to do. So it's this fusion of all of these three things together that create the type of intelligence we need to push forward the companies that we have. Generate is a good example of this, and we use nature's evolution constantly to understand how to make better proteins, all for the purposes of creating better medicines for patients.
Yeah, I look at it in this way. So I think AI systems have mastered how the complex world works, right? Are increasingly mastering the world of, let's say, the macroscopic to, let's say, the microscopic world of like atoms and molecules. But actually what we do with that understanding, and specifically what actions we take with that understanding, actually defines the probability of success, right? Because understanding something alone is not enough to actually create a successful outcome. You need to do something with it. And what I'm really looking forward to is the concept of like poly-intelligence, right? Using that, how do we really come up with like frameworks that prescribe the best set of actions to take to maximize the probability of the outcome that we are working towards, right? And such frameworks are going to be an orchestration of agents, right? Robots, automation, and humans, all working really closely together to maximize the outcome that we are working towards. And I think that technological leap, I think in like poly-intelligence is probably going to help, create value across each and every piece of the healthcare value chain. And that's going to be like a really fun, powerful thing, because this requires all of these things working together, right? Data-driven AI stuff, humans with the knowledge that humans have, robotic systems, automation, laws of physics, how does nature work? We know a lot about laws of physics, right? Incorporating all those kind of stuff, I think it's going to create, tremendous value. I think AI, as we speak today, amazing, has done amazing stuff. But there is still, amazing things still to be done. And I think one of the key areas is taking action, right? What actions do we really take based on the understanding that we have about the world? I think that's going to create, the next paradigm shift going forward, with this whole concept of poly-intelligence.
Thank you all. I joined Flagship now a year and couple of months, and I'm amazed by how AI has been embedded in every company that we are building. I think you guys have been really thinking through how this poly-intelligence AI plus using the human intelligence plus the nature, because nature provides us with lots of insight, really to build on those and create companies that can benefit to improve overall human health. Well, I think we are at the end of the session. Thank you all, and thank you for the audience to be here. And looking forward to see our progress next year and in the years to come using AI to improve human health. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.